I'm Pierre de Bausset, the treasurer of the Society of the French branch of the Society of the Cincinnati. And we are very pleased, of course, to be associated with this event. Why so? A little bit of history, maybe, for those who are not familiar with the Society of the Cincinnati and who we are. The Society of the Cincinnati is the oldest patriotic society in the United States. Formed at the end of the American Revolution, as the treaties for peace and the recognition of the independent United States by the British was happening. So it dates back to 1783. At the very time that they were about to be sent back home to their civilian life, the officers who had fought together during the long war that they finally won created that fraternal society, invoking the example of Lucius Quintus Cincinnatus, a Roman general who had been called out of retirement to fight an onslaught of barbarians, had vanquished the barbarians, and instead of assuming power, decided to return back to his plow. Cordial affection and the defense of the achievements of the American Revolution are the guiding principles of the members that are assembled and that were assembled already at the time in the 13 different constituent societies of the Cincinnati that correspond basically to the 13 original colonies that by then had become 13 states. They invited the French officers who had fought alongside them during the war to join the Society of the Cincinnati, and King Louis XVI granted an authorization to do that, and hence the French Society was formed. I won't talk about our long history because there were ups and downs in the Society of the Cincinnati of France. Today, the Society of the Cincinnati boasts close to 5,000 members, most of them hereditary, but a number of them honorary as well. And of these, 650 are French, descendants to a large extent of French officers who fought during the American Revolution. So back to my original question, why are we happy to be associated with this event? Well, the French Society has made it a principal objective to support the fraternal ties through commemoration, of course, but more importantly through new projects tying our navies and armies between the French and US military officers. Our military commission engages in the funding of activities so that students of our respective naval and army academies learn to know and appreciate each other. It is, put simply, our DNA at work. Now, I wish to thank General de Kytspotter, who is a practitioner of interoperability between armies on the one hand, but also a real historian, for the work he has done on the highs and the lows of our military relationship. In fact, he looked at that military relationship from even before the United States were founded, because I do understand from an official biography of yours, even though it is not widely distributed, that during your summers, I guess, instead of playing cowboy and Indians with your grandchildren, you play the French-Indian Wars. I am awaiting with excitement the publication of your upcoming book on Yorktown, and I look forward to hearing this very interesting presentation. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you so very much. Messieurs les officiers généraux, monsieur le représentant de la Société des Cincinnati, madame la régente des filles de la Révolution américaine, France. Les fils de la Révolution américaine aussi sont présents parmi nous, et de nombreuses personnalités, presidents and representatives of the France and United States Foundation, et beaucoup d'autres sociétés qui m'échappent encore, et qui sont présents aujourd'hui. Donc merci infiniment d'être là. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, my dear brothers and sisters in arms, it's a great honor and such a tremendous privilege to be here tonight with you and to share with you my thoughts, about this military bilateral relationship. So I'm just coming back from New York, where I used to be the military advisor to the French ambassador to the United Nations. Now I'm currently posted at the Ecole Militaire, and I'm in charge of the international relations within the high military studies within the Ecole Militaire. And it's a great honor for me to welcome you at the Ecole Militaire, and especially in this amphitheater, Suffren, which is interesting because it is named, as you all know, after Admiral de Suffren, le bailli de Suffren, who was a famous admiral during the war in America, right, for the independence. But as you know, was not there at the Battle of the Capes. Right? He was down in the West Indies and then to India. However, it's quite important to bear in mind that he was key as a Navy captain under the leadership of Admiral d'Estaing back in '79, right before creating the conditions. Anyways, so I'm so very grateful and very honored that we're going to have this snapshot of 248 years of bilateral military relationship. It's huge, but we're gonna go this quite quickly. This presentation is under Chatham House, of course. I'm not representing the French Ministry of Defense. The views are mine and not those of the Ministry of Defense. This is important to bear in mind. And I'm here in my personal capacity as a Cincinnati Fellow, honorary member. First of all, let me explain the teaser, Foch and Pershing. This event has been fostered by the magnificent initiative around the farewell handshake between those World War I allies and commanders, Foch and Pershing, back in 19 on the USS Leviathan. Obviously, this famous handshake is reminiscent of Bartholdi's 19th century famous statue of Washington and Lafayette, Place des États-Unis here in Paris. You all know that. It's a beautiful statue. And this farewell handshake was duly commemorated at the unveiling of the two identical bronze sculptures titled A Meaningful Handshake. That was last February 25 in the French ambassador's residence back in DC. And a few of us were attending, obviously. And the French Army Chief of Staff, General Pierre attended and offered to his two counterparts, US Army and US Marine Corps, hurrah, these two bronze sculptures, which were created by the most talented Mr. Luc de Moustier. There's another one coming in, by the way. But let us give honor where honor is due. This initiative was born in the Pentagon, and it was born in the mind of a French liaison officer to the US Army, Colonel Thomas Labouche. And without the key support of the societies, namely the Society of the Cincinnati, France, but all the 13 societies in the US, and other societies such as the DARS, the SARS, and many others institutions, this formidable initiative could never get off the ground. So thank you. One statue is made of bronze combined with soil from Yorktown and Omaha Beach, believe it or not, and is now on a permanent exhibit at the Pentagon. This is the picture you have in front, on the left side. And its coating is army green because right now it is belonging to the US Army. And this work was sponsored by the French Cincinnati Society. And the second piece, identical, but composed from soil of Yorktown and sand from Bois-Belleau, is displayed at the USMC, US Marine Corps HQs at Quantico, Virginia. And a third example is on display at the Cercle de l'Union Interalliée here in Paris. So this exquisite and most emblematic project is at the very heart of a rich sequence of bilateral remembrance, celebrating the shared history and common destiny of our two nations. The 200th anniversary of Lafayette, triumphant return to the US, we've been celebrating in the US and France. The 18th anniversary of the Normandy landings last year. And of course, the 250th anniversary of the independence of the United States next year. So let me show you the agenda. This is huge, you know, I told you, but we're gonna go through it pretty quick, hopefully. But I will throw light upon what I do think illustrates the best the trust between our two people, between our two nations and the armed forces. And this trust and cohesion are the very essence of our complementarity nature as the first and oldest ally in the service of a common cause and a common trial. And this ideal is the quest of freedom. So let me kick off now with the idea of the wind of liberty, as I call it, that has blown in the late 1770s in Versailles. So first let us acknowledge here the key role of the cabinet in Versailles, and more particularly the new French Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Comte de Vergennes, who was formerly ambassador in Sweden. And when the King Louis XV passed away, and as early as 1774, the Comte de Vergennes is briefed on a very daily basis on the situation in the colonies, right? And obviously he's reporting back to the King and Queen on a weekly basis as well. And the Lexington and Concord outbursts are thoroughly analyzed in Paris, well, in Versailles, in the cabinet. And the American victory in Bunker Hill in 75 eventually decides Versailles to help the American insurgents against the British crown. So as early as 77, the famous French writer, as you all know, Caron de Beaumarchais, a faux-né of Versailles, organized a clandestine support with hundreds of guns, 40,000 rifles, state-of-the-art Charleville, tons of ammunitions to be secretly delivered in the ports of New England. And above all, more than 100 French officers are embedded in the US Continental Army. So eventually, the victories of the US Continental Army at Saratoga finished convincing Versailles. And in early 78, two treaties of friendship and commerce, and alliance and defense are signed. And these two treaties, ladies and gentlemen, my dear friends, are a de facto or almost a de jure recognition of the United States, of the independence of the US, right? And this is the very first time. So this political and military decision is a critical milestone, which breaks with some 15 years of speculative clashes with Great Britain. So as we are celebrating the bicentennial farewell of the Marquis de Lafayette, I must confess, initially tempted to spend a few moments to properly celebrate Major General de Lafayette, who is undoubtedly one of the most picturesque and fascinating figures of the American Revolution, right? Although Lafayette played a critical role and rendered valuable services to the US through negotiations with the French court, it is fair to say that it is highly likely that Lafayette would have come to America if France had never declared war in the favor of the US. And certainly, France would have participated in the American Revolution if Lafayette had never existed. As a matter of fact, it won't be fair not to dwell a little while on those hundreds other French officers who, like the American doughboys, GIs, crossed the ocean at 18 years old and became the most engaged defenders of liberty and genuine champions of the American cause. Although many who presented themselves at the US Congress in Philadelphia were just adventurers, hardcores, neglected officers, or even braggarts, most of them actually constitute the cream of the French Royal Army, with well-anchored ideals of seeking freedom and supporting the American patriots. To name but a few, the primus inter pares, of course, the illustrious Major de Lafayette, Major General de Lafayette, and also Major General Baron Johann de Kalm, his kind of mentor, you know. And Major Charles L'Enfant, we all know for his magnificent graveyard in Arlington Cemetery, right above JFK's. But we also know him because he was an engineer officer, and he was civilly wounded in '79 during the siege of Savannah, Georgia. And he was not only the designer of the city of Washington, he was also the designer of the Cincinnati Medal. Major General von Steuben, the master drill instructor of the US Continental Army, although a Prussian by birth, was for many decades at the service of the King of France when he joined the Continental Army. Everyone says he's a Prussian or a German. Come on, guys. He's French. Anyways, they all illustrate to an extraordinary degree the earnestness, the zeal in the cause of freedom, and the unswerving devotion of many other French gallant officers embedded in the US Continental Army. So, let me just throw light upon three less remembered heroes who are, alas, often overlooked, but who are definitely the true embodiment of our rock-solid bilateral brotherhood in arms. Colonel François-Louis de Fleury, on the left side, a French engineer who volunteered in 1777 and is the hero of the Battle of Stony Point, south of West Point, New York, on the Hudson River, in July '79. He was commanding a battalion under General Wayne's leadership. He's a war hero. Colonel de Fleury won a Congressional Medal for storming the British bastion there. Only 7 Congressional Medals were bestowed during the American Revolution. This Congressional Medal was the ancestor of the medal we know now. And the De Fleury Medal, named for Fleury, is still nowadays awarded for outstanding service members of the United States Army Corps of Engineers. And we all know, we active duty members of the armed forces, we've seen them in Afghanistan, these US engineers receiving the De Fleury Medal. Then we have on the center Brigadier General Du Portail, who preceded Lafayette and became, as early as '77, the main advisor to General Washington for the art of combat engineering. He is the father of the US Army Corps of Engineers. After the Revolution, he came back to France and became the Secretary of Defense during the early years of the French Revolution. Man. And his legacy is still vivid in the US Army as the father of the US engineers. How about Brigadier General Armand de la Rouerie? Boy, what a difficult French name in the mouth of an American, La Rouerie. So he immediately became Colonel Armand under General Washington's decision. Colonel Armand recruited volunteer riders, which he paid from his own pocket. He took over General Pulaski's legion after Pulaski's death at the end of '79. And Colonel Armand took part in the battles of New York, Monmouth, Brandywine, of course, the campaign of Yorktown in Virginia. La Rairie, Colonel Armand, is often regarded as the anti-Lafayette, you know, but he's so well commended by the US military, because when the US military landed in 1944 in Normandy, the first thing they asked was not Picpus cemetery. Where is Fougère? Where is Colonel Armand buried? Believe it or not. So bottom line, he deserves much more than what history tells us, right? Now, let's have a deep dive within the French Expeditionary Force with Rochambeau. And now it's time to give honor where honor is due, because I strongly believe that the French and American allies would have never won against the best army in the world should Lieutenant General Comte Jean-Baptiste de Rochambeau not been designated by King Louis XVI. Rochambeau was literally a war hero, a war vet. Of all the European wars, with such a record of outstanding military performance, wounded in action several times, by British bullets, by the way. And he commanded under fire the most prestigious regiment by the time, which was the Régiment d'Auvergne. And Rochambeau was definitely more at home on the combat, on the field, on the battlefield, than in the drawing room in the court of Versailles. So let me tell you that he truly had the leadership of General Eisenhower, the brilliance of General MacArthur, and the charism of General Patton. But above all, he is truly such a humble character who has been devoted all his long career to his soldiers, deserving the nickname of Papa Rochambeau. And believe me, ladies and gentlemen, at that time, in the context of the 18th century army, that means a lot. And on the verge of retiring as the vice chief of the French Armée Royale, he is chosen by the king himself to lead the Expédition Particulière. And the icing on the cake, so to speak, is that he's the most prominent expert of siege warfare in the 18th century. He has conducted many sieges during the 7 Years' War in Europe. And this, my dear friends, this will definitely make the difference in Yorktown. So, by appointing General de Rochambeau, Versailles could not therefore find a better ambassador to fight alongside the Generalissimo, General Washington, and let him fully command and win the final victory. Rochambeau was definitely the best French treat offered to the United States. Now, since we are among Navy guys, I was obliged to, in this amphitheater, talk about the Battle of the Capes, right? So a few words on the Chesapeake Bay battle, as we say in France. September 5th, by the way, we're gonna commemorate tomorrow, duty, this battle and this victory at the Luxembourg. And well, we must say that the French Navy really created the conditions of victory on land, and this was a key factor of superiority. Ladies and gentlemen, the gallant feats of those 10,000 sailors in the waters of the United States remain a just source of pride for the French Navy of the reign of Louis XVI, and a first-rate service rendered to Washington. And I'd be very happy to dig in, because this is such a formidable victory. The first ever in the American seas, by the way, offered to you. How about the Battle of the Hook? Well, as a former French hussar, I'm so very proud to say that it is one of the most gallant actions of the French Expeditionary Force, because this cavalry engagement, one of the few of the American Revolution, by the way, this Battle of the Hook provides America's earliest example of a perfect joint Franco-American operation. And the engagement of the Duke de Lauzun, Hussars and Lancers, those brave horsemen, along with Lieutenant Colonel John Mercer's Virginians, the militia. And they have greatly succeeded to defeat the infamous Lieutenant Colonel Banastre Tarleton's dragoons. You know, Banastre Tarleton, this butcher of Virginia, this British dragoon you may remember in the movie The Patriot. You know, this greenish English cavalry officer in this movie, killing the son of Mel Gibson. You know, remember that. So we almost killed him, wounded in action, alas. But the gallant Royal Welsh Fusiliers as well, and the loyalist Lieutenant Colonel Sinker's Green Rangers were also defeated, and they fled away, thanks to the militia and the Duke of Lauzun's legion. So this epic combat is not only a tactical victory, where it stops the enemy's foraging party, but it is also strategically important and significant because it seals off the peninsula and the possible way of exploitation to the north from Gloucester Point. So the British and the mercenaries, German mercenaries, are therefore tightly corked in Gloucester across the York River. Allow me now to spend a few moments on this beautiful and brilliant military victory of Yorktown. Yorktown truly covers all the attributes of a political victory, which gives a strategic dimension, but not just a tactical, operational one. Yorktown is an exemplary bilateral military success. It was the first of all and the second and last major victory of the Continental Army, but this time with the official help of the French. The Siege of Yorktown is the very example of the perfect interoperability and coordination between the Continental Army and the Royal French Army. This tremendous victory not only revealed the dazzling of the Allied force and its unity of effort throughout the campaign, but it also revealed the formidable unity of command, which the British authorities, by the way, sorely lacked. This excellent understanding between the Commander-in-Chief and General de Rochambeau was made possible by the interpersonal skills of all the staff officers, namely General François de Chaclus, and of course his Chief of Staff, and of course General de Lafayette, and many other embedded French officers. And these excellent relations between the two military leaders, whose military educations, by the way, were radically different, and what is more, did not speak a word of the other's language, contrasted sharply with the legendary misunderstanding of the British leadership. In addition, the charisma and political military genius of the two Allied generals reflected on the entire staff, which was capable of planning and conducting complex inter-allied operations together. Never in the military history of the United States has the victory of the Continental Army been so dependent on the personal and collective commitment, the courage, the fighting spirit, the bravery of its officers, non-commissioned officers and soldiers and militiamen, as well as the French allies. The successful outcome of this last fight undoubtedly boosted the self-confidence of the fledgling Continental Army and steadfastly demonstrated its true professionalism. It was in Yorktown that the Continental Army finished its training in contact with a brother-in-arms, French brother-in-arms, and laid the foundation of its military values and ethics that still endure today. We have to move from the American Revolution to the Civil War. Yes, the French participated in the Civil War. How? Well, this is not very well known, but Although the French were not officially involved, as we all know, in the Civil War, many French individual officers decided to join the Union and fight for what they thought were truly our common values. The most well-known example is the French royal family, who was in exile in Belgium during the Second Empire. We know that. But believe it or not, the Orleans brothers and cousins served as aides-de-camp to General George McClellan, the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff. The Prince de Joinville, the Comte de Paris, and the Duc de Chartres all volunteered to serve as Union Army captains in the American Civil War, giving advice, taking the orders, riding to the next division or Army Corps and giving the orders from the boss, right? Another illustrious example is Philippe de Kerden de Trobriand. Wow, gosh, another difficult name in the mouth of an American. A Breton aristocrat who immigrated in the 1820s in the US, and he joined the Union and eventually was promoted Brigadier General at Gettysburg. And after the war, he was posted in the Western Territories during 10 years. And my dear friends, it is under his leadership that General George Custer was killed in action in the Indian Territories on the frontier. So he finished his career in the US Army as a Major General. And Major General Philippe de Trobriand is buried in Seville, Long Island, New York. His tomb is pretty impressive. And I give you the advice to visit this when you're in New York. It's very close. How about the Great War? Back to Foch and Pershing. The 100,000 19-year-old American volunteers in 1917 vividly reminded us, the 19-year-old Marquis de Lafayette and hundreds of French officers embedded in the fledgling US Continental Army. The American Expeditionary Force, under the overall command of John Pershing, echoed also the French Expeditionary Force led by Lieutenant General de Rochambeau back in 1780, as we've seen. When the American Expeditionary Forces came to France in June 1917, the Yanks allegedly said, "Lafayette, we are here." It is actually General Pershing's aide, Colonel Charles Stanton, who said this in a remarkable speech at the Picpus Center in Paris, 12th arrondissement, in front of the tomb of the Marquis de Lafayette. We know this. But in these few words, the American US Army colonel could not better sum up the density and the depth of the true friendship bonds between the United States and France. Lafayette, nous voilà. When one goes to Argonne region in France and sees the thousands American First World War graveyards among the poppies and the blue flowers, notably the magnificent Chateau Thierry American Monument and Hill 204, please go there. This is so impressive. We think about the thousands brave fallen American doughboys of the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red Round, the 2nd Infantry Division, Indian Head, the 3rd Infantry Division, Rock of the Marne, the 42nd Infantry Division, Rainbow, the 93rd Infantry Division, or the gallant Marine Corps Brigade during the Battle of Belleau Wood, to name but a few. Let us not forget also those brave American soldiers on A Main who came over way before the American Expeditionary Forces, the AEF, as of 1915. Here one thinks, of course, about the American Field Service, i.e. the American ambulances, and also those reckless and courageous pilots and roughly 200 airmen of the American Lafayette Flying Corps, of which 69 were killed in action over the French battlefield. The French people is still so very grateful of this irrepressible American commitment, which literally saved France. We know it. So at the end of 1917, 200,000 doughboys were already settled in. And in November 1918, 2 million American soldiers were deployed, fielding 28 infantry divisions, which were engaged autonomously on the front line. In June 1918, during the last Ludendorff offensives, the Indian Head Division conducted a gallant counteroffensive at Bitterwood and denied the siege of Paris, thanks to the Marine. End of July 1918, the 1st US Army had a full sector on the front of Saint-Mihiel, but highly suffered from a ravaging death toll of 820 killed in action per day. The US Army then held 22% of the overall front line, 22%. The British 19% and the French 59%. So let me tell you, my dear friends, that the French pay a particular tribute to those 320,000 First World War American casualties, of which 53,000 were killed in action, 63,000 non-combat death, and 204,000 wounded in action. The French people shall never forget this. The American commitment in France was quite brief, but highly crucial and critical for winning over the common enemy. The victory of the Allied forces in 1918 also revealed the formidable unity of command, the excellent understanding between the commanders. In the unspeakable ordeal of horror of the Great War, our bicentennial alliance forged in 1778 was definitely confirmed. Let us jump a few decades forward. 24 years after the victory on the Western Front, the American soldiers crossed again the Atlantic Ocean to save the French from the Nazi tyranny. Operation Torch, November 8, 1942, will be the kickoff of the French and American perfect interoperability. As of 1943, the Free French and French Army of Africa were being amalgamated. The new French army was built up in Northern Africa thanks to the United States and the model of the US divisions. The French and American armies became fully interoperable. French and American soldiers would then fight together in the European theaters of operations. In November 1943, with 4 infantry divisions and roughly 112,000 French soldiers strong. The French Expeditionary Corps, under the command of French Lieutenant General Alphonse Juin, was fully part of the 5th US Army of Lieutenant General Mark Clark, who liberated Italy. And thanks to the gallant deeds of the French Expeditionary Corps in Italy, the humiliation of the French army during the 1940 defeat was definitely washed away. And by the way, when my Rochambeau, Helen, my wife, we visited the Second World War Museum in New Orleans, we were shocked because nothing of this was mentioned. Nothing. Nothing about Juin, nothing about those, divisions under the American leadership. Just the Brits. Oh my goodness. Anyways, so we made the complaint, we made the review, and we made the report back to the Consul General. And he said, yes, we know. We've been working on this since 20 years. Anyways. How about the Allied invasion? 1944, 2 major landings, we all know that, in world military history radically changed the course of the Second World War. Although the landing in Normandy in June 1944, Operation Overlord, was not conducted along with the French regular army. The French resistance commitment, however, was considered as critical. The French resistance, which was strung up to 1 light infantry division, conducted harassment and sabotage operations to the rear of the enemy, thus preventing any decisive reinforcement. General Eisenhower officially commanded their critical action. 2 months later, August 1944, the Allied landing in Provence, Operation Dragon, led by General Alexander Patch, was fielded with the full French First Army, the Army Bravo, under the command of General Jean de Lattre de Tassigny. The French First Army was the largest French force that was ever amassed under the operational command of a foreign military leader, General Jacob Divers, commander of the 6th Army Group, also referred as the Southern Group of Armies. It is also worth noting, my dear friends, be really careful about that. You'll find this in not a single history books, major history books written in America or in Great Britain. But as a matter of fact, General de Lattre will actually be the only French general ever in history to command 4 US Army divisions of the 21st US Army Corps in January 1945 to free the Alsace region. He had full command on those divisions to liberate, to free the Alsace. And this is not well known, but the US won't do it again. I don't know why, because that was a home run, for sure. Anyways, so during the final month of hostilities in the European theater of World War II, the Supreme Commander of the Allied Special Force on the Western Front, General Ike, had 73 divisions under his command, of which 49 were American, 12 British, 3 Canadian, 1 Polish, and 11 French belonging to the French First Army. 11 out of 73. This is huge. The fallen American soldiers' service and sacrifice will be forever reminded with the utmost respect and honor. Now, let us jump to the war in Korea. We're almost there. We're almost there. A few years after World War I, World War II, the crossing of the 38th parallel in Korea by the North Korean army marked the start of the Korean War. As the French army was already engaged in Indochina, fighting against communism, and had to fulfill its obligations in the European theater with NATO, as well as to maintain security in its North African territories, France, as a permanent member of the Security Council of the United Nations, could only agree to be and to deploy a limited contribution to Korea. We were overstretched, right? So the United Nations French battalion was born, and in order to give a certain distinction and prestige to France's 1,000 strong but rather modest contribution, Lieutenant General Raoul Magrin-Verderet, aka Ralph Monclar, temporarily and rather uniquely gave up his 4 stars for a lieutenant colonel rank, and was made the senior national representative. The UN French battalion was attached to the American unit, becoming the 4th Battalion, 23rd Regimental Combat Team of the US 2nd Infantry Division, Indian Head. You see the patch on the right side picture. The French soldiers quickly demonstrated all their bravery and resilience as they took part in one of the most violent battles in the war, the Battle of the Heartbreak Ridge. There, they definitely earned full recognition from the American leadership. I'm gonna go not deep dive, but rather quickly through the Gulf War, the Kosovo operation, and Afghanistan. But the following decades, marked the Cold War era, where American and French forces held the line facing the Warsaw Pact. No major joint operational engagement occurred until the Gulf War in 1990. So during the Gulf War, the first Gulf War, 18,000 French soldiers are deployed, and they represented the 2nd largest European contingent. In January 91, the French division was placed under the tactical control of the US 18th Airborne Corps, operating on its left flank. And after 40 years, American and French forces eventually gathered new in combat and completed their interoperability endeavor with common operational doctrines and tactical and technical procedures. The 1990s will be full of joint operational deployments under mainly the aegis of the United Nations. In Africa, in former Yugoslavia, and the turn of the century will witness a major operational deployment within the NATO Kosovo Force, the KFOR, where the French will continue to be fully engaged alongside their American brothers and sisters in arms. And after the terrorist attacks on the US, September 11th, French troops immediately deployed alongside their American allies, mainly in Afghanistan, within the International Security Assistance Force, the ISAF, and with special forces right a few days after in northern Afghanistan. And in November 2009, a complete reorganization of the French military deployment in Afghanistan saw the creation of the Task Force Lafayette, a combined brigade force which comprised most of the French army units deployed within the ISAF in Afghanistan. So the French Brigade Lafayette was placed directly under the American command in the East, Regional Sector East, and in parallel, operational mentoring and liaison teams, the OMLTs, were embedded, and embedded training teams, the ETTs, were operating in close cooperation with the American forces within US Task Force Phoenix. And those who were deployed there, we fully recognize the perfect cohesion and interoperability between our forces. And the bond that united the American and the French military is still vivid today in the Middle East, within Operation Inherent Resolve, OIR, or within the NATO mission in Iraq, LMI, which we French are currently commanding. The partnership between our two armies continues to definitely play a crucial role in global security and stability to this day. To maintain cohesion and interoperability after a decade of mutual operational support in Africa, in the Sahel region in particular, the US and French forces continue to engage in joint operations and multinational exercises, from combating terrorism in the Middle East to supporting Ukraine in its fight for freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, my dear friends, to wrap it up, I'm so very proud to say tonight that France is not only the oldest ally to the United States, helping to gain and secure their full independence, but we are the first ones. And after 248 years of common military engagements, the profound and unique brotherhood in arms that united American and French military is still today a genuine and living reality. Cohesion and interoperability are the key common denominator today. This fellowship in arms was first sealed by the blood shed together on the American Revolutionary War battlefields, with 2,212 French killed in action during the American Revolution, in the seas and the field in the US, but also on the beaches of France, the countryside of Italy and Germany, in the deep frozen valleys of Korea, the deserts of Iraq, the deep gorges of Afghanistan. And with this outstanding ongoing bilateral commitment, the upcoming generations won't forget that France will always respond and stand by its first and oldest ally. The French will never forget. God bless the American and French enduring alliance. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.